The spruce forests of northern British Columbia don't forgive you for being soft. They don't care about your history or your intentions or the particular shape of your grief. The cold comes in off the Skeena River like something with a purpose, and the trees stand so close together that even the light has to fight its way through. Out there past the logging roads and the rusted equipment and the silence that has texture to it, a person can disappear entirely. Some people go out there to find themselves. Most of them are lying about that. What they really want is to stop being found. Calvin Marsh had been doing exactly that for 6 years. He was 43 years old. He had a small engine repair shop at the edge of a town called Endako that barely qualified as a town anymore. A gas station, a post office open 3 days a week, a diner that closed at 2 in the afternoon because there was nobody left to feed after that. He had a wood stove he kept burning 9 months of the year and a border collie named Pip, who had been his wife's dog first, and was now the only living thing that looked at him like he still mattered. He had enough work to keep his hands busy, which was the point. He had stopped wanting things with the determined focus of a man who had learned exactly what wanting cost. The people of Endako had quietly stopped expecting anything from Calvin, not unkindly. They just understood that he had drawn a line somewhere around the time of the accident and had not crossed back over it. He was replacing the carburetor on a snowmobile the morning she arrived. It was October. The first real frost had come the night before and left everything silver and brittle in the early light. He heard the crunch of tires on the gravel and didn't look up. Nobody came to the shop before 8, and it was barely 7:30. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the garage door. "Are you Calvin Marsh?" He looked up then. She was young, mid-20s maybe, standing in the pale frostlight with a canvas duffel over one shoulder and the particular stillness of someone who had rehearsed what came next many times on the road and was now deciding whether to say it. Gitxsan, clearly. Her dark hair was pulled back, and she wore a canvas jacket too light for the temperature, which told him she'd been traveling a long way and hadn't packed for where she was ending up. Her boots were good. Her eyes were careful. "Depends who's asking," he said. "My name is Cecilia Swiftwind," she said. "My mother was Lily Swiftwind. You knew her as Lily Cross." Calvin set down his wrench. He hadn't heard that name in 11 years. Lily Cross. She had worked a summer at the mill outside of Smithers when Calvin was still driving lumber trucks, back before the marriage and the house and all of it. She was the kind of person who made you feel like the room had better air in it. They'd been friends the way people are friends when they're both in transit. Real but time-limited, the way those things are. She'd gone back north. He'd gone south. He hadn't thought about her in years, which now felt like a kind of failure. "Lily's gone," he said. 3 months ago. He looked at the girl, the canvas jacket, the careful eyes, the duffel that didn't look heavy enough to contain a whole life, but probably did. "She sent you here," he said. Cecilia reached into the front pocket of the duffel and produced an envelope, folded twice and soft from handling. "Before she died," she said, "she told me that if I couldn't find a way forward on my own, there was a man in Endako named Calvin Marsh. She said he was stubborn and probably wouldn't want the trouble." She paused. She said to come anyway. "That sounds like her," Calvin said. "There's a letter." Cecilia held it out. He didn't take it right away. He wiped his hands on a shop rag and looked at the envelope like it might say something before he opened it. Then he took it. "Come inside. It's cold." She stood just past the threshold of the small office off the garage, not quite committing to the room. He read the letter at the workbench, while Pip walked over and sniffed the girl's boots with professional thoroughness and then sat down next to her, which was not something Pip did with strangers. Lily's handwriting was looping and urgent, the handwriting of a woman who always had more to say than time to say it. "Calvin, if you're reading this, then Cecilia found you, which means she's as stubborn as I always hoped she'd be. My girl is 26 years old, and she is smarter than she lets on, and more afraid than she shows, which is something you will understand because you are the same way. She has a diploma in land surveying from BCIT and 3 years of field experience, and no permanent position because the companies in this province have a long memory for whose daughter she is, and mine was a woman who spoke up at the wrong meetings about the wrong pipelines. I am not asking you to fix that. I am asking you to give her a winter, work, shelter, a reference that doesn't carry my name like a liability. After that, she goes where she chooses. You told me once, sitting outside the cookhouse at Smith, you had stopped making plans. I told you that was the saddest thing I'd ever heard from someone with so much life left. You laughed. I didn't. I am asking you from wherever I am now. Stop making that true. Calvin folded the letter. He looked at Cecilia, who had not moved from her spot near the door. Pip had not moved either. She had no right to do this, Calvin said, not angry, just honest. I know, Cecilia said. I told her that. A beat, she said you'd say exactly that. What did she tell you about me? That you were fair, that you didn't pretend. Cecilia looked at him steadily. That you lost someone and it broke something in you that you decided not to fix. The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, the frostlight was starting to warm into something pale and gold. I'm not looking for charity, she said. I'm a qualified land surveyor. I have my tickets. I can run equipment, I can read terrain, and I can work harder than anyone you've hired in the last 5 years, which I'm guessing isn't very many people. She paused. I'm looking for 1 season of honest work for honest pay. That's all I'm asking. Calvin looked down at the folded letter in his hands. Outside, the spruce trees stood in their dense and patient rows. The frost was burning off the gravel in slow curls of vapor. Pip looked up at him with the mild expectation of a creature who had learned to read him better than he read himself. There's a room above the garage, he said. Heat works. There's a lock on the door. He stood up. Supper's at 6. I don't cook fancy. He walked back into the garage. Then he stopped. One thing, he said without turning around. I don't talk about my wife, not with anyone, not ever. I need you to know that going in. A pause. All right, she said quietly. He went back to the carburetor. Cecilia looked at the letter still on the workbench. Lily hadn't mentioned any wife at all, and she understood for the first time exactly what she'd walked into. Not just a job. A house with closed rooms. A man who had stopped moving and called it peace. The first weeks were functional and nothing more. Cecilia woke early. She had found on her own that the pump house needed resealing before the deep freeze came. And she did it without being asked properly, not the foam and duct tape solution that had been holding it for 2 winters. She figured out the generator's temperament, the way it stuttered on cold starts and needed 30 seconds of patience before it caught, and she stopped it from dying twice in the first week by simply paying attention. She cooked in the evenings with whatever was in the pantry, adding things she'd brought from a market 2 towns over that Calvin didn't recognize but ate because they were good. He watched her the way you watch weather in the mountains, not anxiously but carefully tracking the signs. But she wasn't a system moving through. She was the opposite. She was the stillness that comes after one. They didn't talk much beyond the work. He asked questions about the pump, the generator, the fence line along the north property. She answered in facts. She asked about the terrain east of the river, the soil composition, the old survey markers on the ridge. He answered in facts. They built something functional out of the exchange, and neither of them reached past it. On the 19th day, Calvin was up on the roof of the garage checking the flashing around the stovepipe when the ice gave. It had been there since spring, invisible under the surface rust, and it let go without warning. He caught the ridge cap on the way down, enough to change the fall but not stop it. He hit the frozen ground on his side and lay there looking up at the pale gray sky while his body took inventory. Cecilia appeared above him. She crouched down without panic. Can you feel your feet? He could. Hands? Yes. Then nothing's broken. She stayed where she was. You're also not as careful as a man living alone needs to be. He almost said something. He stopped himself. I've been managing this place alone for 6 years, he said. I know, she said. That's not the same as managing it well. She helped him up. He pulled his hand back once he had his footing. She didn't react. But for the rest of that afternoon, he was aware, in the precise and particular way you are aware of something you've been trying not to notice, of exactly where she was. That evening at supper, neither of them mentioned it, but the silence had shifted. Something in it had a different weight, and both of them knew it. It started with the wood stove. He'd been sitting with it an hour past dark, not reading, not doing anything, just watching the fire through the glass the way he sometimes did when the quiet got too full. He heard her come down the stairs. He didn't tell her to go back. She didn't ask. She sat in the other chair, the one that had been empty so long it almost looked decorative, and looked at the fire with the same quality of attention she gave to everything. Not restless, just present. After a long time, she said, she used to say fire was the only honest light, because it moves. Your mother, Calvin said. Yes. He looked at the flame. He had sat next to this stove for 6 years and had not thought about fire as honest or dishonest. It was just fire, heat, something to maintain. Tonight it seemed different. She talked about you, Cecilia said. She said you were one of the few people who ever listened to her like she was worth listening to. A pause. She said that was rarer than it should be. She was the one worth listening to, Calvin said. She was, Cecilia said. But she knew how to recognize it in other people. She looked across at him, not shyly, not with performance, just looking. The way she looked at terrain she was trying to understand before she put a line through it. What are you planning to do with the land east of the river, she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Nothing, it's been sitting. It's good land, she said. The elevation changes, but the drainage is better than it looks. If someone put in the survey work, it could be filed for a proper timber license, or left, but it shouldn't just sit. You've been out there? 3 times, she said it without apology. I like to know what I'm working near. He looked at her then. The fire moved. Pip shifted at Calvin's feet with a long sighing exhale. What do you want? He asked. After the season, where will you go? She was quiet for a while. The stove ticked as the metal expanded. I don't know, she said. I used to. After my mother got sick, the plan went away. She looked at the fire. I think I want to do work that means something. I think I want to be somewhere that doesn't flinch when I walk in the door. She paused. I think that's not a small thing to ask for, but it shouldn't be as hard as it's been. Calvin said nothing, but something in him moved, not dramatically, not like a door thrown open, more like a window latch lifted an inch by the pressure of the wind, not by hand. He didn't say good night when he went up. He never did. But that night, for the first time in longer than he could account for, he didn't want the evening to have ended when it did. They drove into Burns Lake together on the 1st of November. Supplies, no way around it. Calvin had been putting it off. Burns Lake was not a small town by Endaco's standards, and it had opinions. He felt the attention as they walked from the truck to the hardware store. Some of it was curious. Some of it was the particular blank-faced watching of people deciding what to think before they'd seen enough to think it. A man named Doris Pratt, no, a man named Gerald Pratt, who ran the land titles office and fancied himself the unofficial keeper of what was proper, was standing near the entrance to the feed store when they came out. That's your situation, Calvin, he said, not hostile, friendly in the way that isn't. Calvin stopped. He felt Cecilia go still beside him. He turned and looked at Pratt with the flat calm of someone who has already had the conversation internally and does not find it interesting. She's a land surveyor, Calvin said. Best one I've worked with, and she's with me, so whatever you're about to say, you can recalibrate. Pratt looked at him, then at Cecilia, then back. He recalibrated. They loaded the truck without further conversation. On the highway home, the silence was different from the silences that had come before it. Warmer. More layered. You didn't have to do that, Cecilia said. I know. Why did you? Calvin looked at the long gray road ahead, the spruce closing in on both sides like a corridor. Because it was accurate, he said, and because some things need to be said before they're let to stand. She looked at him, then she turned back to the road. The man from the land titles office had watched them pull away. He'd seen enough. He was already thinking. It was a Sunday in the 5th week when Calvin found the field notebooks. He hadn't meant to look. She'd left one open on the kitchen table, and what stopped him wasn't the notes, though the survey notes were meticulous, clean. The handwriting of someone who understood that a misread number became a real mistake in the ground, but the sketches in the margins. Small ones, precise, done in pencil during what must have been field breaks, the ridgeline east of the river rendered with an accuracy that wasn't just technical but affectionate. The pump house from the southeast angle, which was the angle that caught it best. A profile of Pip sitting in the truck window, ears forward, which was so exactly Pip that it was almost funny. And one drawing, small, tucked into the corner of a page, of the ridge at dusk, from a vantage point he recognized as the rock shelf she must have climbed to on her third day out. She had drawn it the way you draw something you're afraid might not be there the next time you look. She was at the door when he turned around. She didn't look embarrassed. "My mother taught me," she said. "She said if you can draw the land, you understand it. If you understand it, you can speak for it." Calvin picked up the notebook and looked at the ridge drawing for a long time. He had walked that ridge 200 times. He had never seen it look like that. She had found the exact quality of light that made it worth staying for. "You're wasting yourself doing pump houses," he said. "A person needs both," she said simply. "The work keeps me here, the drawing keeps me whole." He set the notebook down carefully. "Could you draw something for me?" She looked at him, measuring something. "Then I already know what it would be." 4 days later, she gave him a small drawing, torn from the back of a field book. It was the garage, but not how he saw it. She'd drawn it from the edge of the tree line, the way it sat against the hill. Small and stubborn and lit from inside, the stovepipe sending up a thin line of smoke into the winter sky, and in the window, barely suggested, the outline of a figure at the workbench. It looked like somewhere someone chose to be. That evening, she wasn't at supper. He found her outside on the woodpile, sitting with her knees drawn up, looking at the tree line with an expression that was working through something complicated. "Cecilia." She looked up. Her eyes were wet, not crying, the aftermath of it. She wiped them in one efficient motion. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something my mother left out of the letter because she knew if she'd put it in, you'd have said no." Calvin sat down on the other end of the woodpile. She looked at the ground. "I'm not just passing through the area. There's a man named Roy Calder who holds a seat on the Regional Lands Board. He's been running a quiet campaign to get the reserve land east of the river reclassified so it can be opened for mineral tenure. My mother was the one who filed the objections 3 years ago. When she died, Cecilia stopped. Started again. When she died, the objections needed someone to continue them. The only way I can legally intervene in the process is if I hold a professional position in the region and file under my own license. I needed to be somewhere with a real address, a real employer, for at least 1 season before I can file." "And Calder knows this," Calvin said. "Yes." She said it without drama, which made it land harder. "He has people watching the filing office. He's been waiting to see if I find a situation or get pushed out of the region." Calvin was quiet for a long time. A raven called from somewhere in the spruce. Pip had come out and sat between them without invitation. "Why didn't Lily tell me that?" he asked. Cecilia looked up. Her voice was steady, sad, proud. "Because she wanted you to want me here," she said, "not to feel obligated. She said if she put the whole thing in the letter, it would read like a favor being called in, and you'd never know if you'd actually chosen." That's the part that stays with me. Lily Swiftwind was dying, and still she understood the difference between a choice made freely and a choice made from guilt. She built the whole thing around that distinction. That's not strategy. That's love at its most precise. Calvin looked at the drawing he'd been holding without realizing it, the garage in the trees lit from within. He didn't put it down. He didn't sleep that night. He lay in the dark with the stove cooling below him and thought about all the space inside himself that he had carefully boarded up. The room with his wife's name on it. The room full of the future they'd planned on the road to Prince George the morning the ice took the truck, and the only thing that came back was Calvin. The room he had built around himself when the silence came, and he had decided deliberately, finally, that it was easier to stop wanting than to keep losing. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, he allowed himself to look at something he had been looking away from for weeks. He did not want Cecilia to leave. It wasn't obligation. Charlie's letter, Lily's letter, had started it, but this was not that. It was something that had grown in the margin of the ordinary, in the woodstove conversations, in the notebook left on the table, in the way she'd drawn the ridge like something worth defending. He was afraid of it, not the way he was afraid of loss, a different kind of afraid, the kind that means something is real. He drove to Burns Lake the next morning alone. He went to the county lands office and asked about Roy Calder's reclassification filing. The clerk confirmed it. He asked what would formalize Cecilia's standing to intervene. A professional services contract with a registered property holder, the clerk said, filed this season. A pause. Or, he said more quietly, a change of legal status. Marriage record does it too. Calvin said nothing. He drove home slow, letting the truck find its own pace through the gray winter light. By the time he turned off the highway onto the gravel road, he knew what he was going to say. Not because of Calder. Not because of Lily's letter. Because he had spent 6 years being a man who drove with his eyes fixed on a fixed point and called it surviving, and he was done pretending that was the same as living. He found her splitting wood behind the garage. The axe came down clean and even, the rounds falling apart without drama. Cecilia, he said. She drove the axe into the block and turned. And for the first time in 6 years, Calvin Marsh said something he hadn't prepared, hadn't reasoned through, couldn't walk back across the line. I don't want you to go, he said. She didn't answer right away. She had a way of receiving important things, not rushing toward them, not pulling back, just letting them settle before she responded. The wind moved through the spruce. A jay crossed overhead in a quick diagonal line. What does that mean, she asked, not suspicious, not hopeful, just precise. It means the work here is better since you came. It means I sleep more than 4 hours a night. It means that drawing you made of the garage is the first thing I've looked at in 6 years that made this place feel like somewhere I chose instead of somewhere I landed. He looked at his hands. They were the hands of a man who had spent 6 years keeping himself busy. It means I've been so careful about not wanting things that I almost forgot what it felt like when I did. And I don't want to go back to not knowing. She was quiet. The woodpile steamed faintly in the cold air. I told myself this wasn't going to happen, she said. So did I. I came here for work, for 1 season. I know. I don't know what I am to you, she said. I'm not your daughter. I came here through my mother's memory of you, and that's not a category that has a name. No, he said, it doesn't. He looked at her. But I think you find the name after you make the decision, not before. She looked at him then the way she looked at terrain, finding the true lines, not the surface, the underneath. My mother said you were someone worth finding, she said softly. She was too generous. She wasn't generous, Cecilia said. She was accurate. She turned and picked up a piece of split wood, set it aside with the others. I'll think about it, she said. It wasn't yes, it wasn't no, and for the first time in 6 years, he was afraid of something that wasn't grief. That was new, that was almost something. Roy Calder came on a Wednesday with a man from the regional board and a laminated notice he held like it already had the force of law. Calvin had been in the shop. Cecilia had been at the table going over survey data. Calder walked past the shop without stopping, which told Calvin what he needed to know about how the man operated. He came through the shop door before Calder reached the house. Mr. Marsh. Calder was carefully pleasant, the kind of pleasant that's meant to move through you. We're here to formalize the status of your assistant. If she isn't registered with a licensed firm by the 1st of December, the regional board's position is that her standing to object is. She's registered, Calvin said. He hadn't moved far, he didn't need to, as of this week. Under my property and her own license, the paperwork's filed. Calder looked at him, then at the man from the board. That's a recent development. Most good things are, Calvin said. And her residency? Calvin looked at the man for a long moment. He was the kind of man who expected people to cost him less than they did. She's my intended, Calvin said. He heard Cecilia behind him. She said nothing. Calder's math changed. He recalculated. He left. Calvin turned around. Cecilia was standing in the doorway of the shop with an expression that held three things at once. Not quite exasperation, not quite relief, not quite amusement, but something close to all three at the edges. "You should have asked me first," she said. "I know. That was not how a person asks." "No," he said, "it wasn't." He stood there in the cold light coming through the garage door. "I know that." A pause, the kind that has weight. Then she said quietly and clearly, "Ask me properly." He did, not with ceremony, not with performance, standing in the gravel of the yard with the spruce trees close and the winter light coming sideways through them in long, pale shafts. "I am not an easy person," he said. "I go quiet when I should talk, and I work when I should stop, and I've spent 6 years making a life that fits one, and I don't know how to promise you anything except this. I will pay attention to you. Every day. I will actually see you. And I believe, that's something worth building on." She looked at him for a long time. "My mother knew this would happen," she said. "I think she planned it," Calvin said. "She wasn't subtle." "No." She was right, though. Cecilia looked at him steadily. She usually was, a breath. A pause long enough to be its own kind of answer. "Yes," she said. They filed the paperwork in Burns Lake the following week. They were married in early December in the courthouse with the notary and 2 witnesses, one of whom was the clerk who had quietly told Calvin about the marriage record option and who seemed genuinely pleased. Roy Calder withdrew the reclassification application 3 weeks later, once the formal objection was on the record with Cecilia's license number on it. The land east of the river stayed what it had been. The spruce stayed. The ridgeline stayed. The winter settled into the property differently after that. Not loudly. The garage was still the garage. The woodpile still needed splitting. The generator still needed its 30 seconds of patience on cold mornings. But the silence that had lived in every room of that small house above the shop was replaced, slowly, with the sound of 2 people moving through the same space with intention. In February, she told him at the kitchen table. She said it plainly, the way she said everything that cost her something to say. She put her hands flat on the table first, the way she did when she was about to say something precise. He sat very still for a moment. The stove was going. Pip was at his feet. The frost on the window was catching the early light in the way it only did for about 15 minutes each morning, and this was one of them. Then he stood up, crossed the room, and held her. Not with words, not with performance, just held her, the way a man holds something he had quietly, completely given up on ever having. Outside, the spruce forest stood in its patient rows. The river was locked under 2 feet of ice. The ridge she had drawn from memory was sitting in the same blue-gray light it always sat in. And somewhere in the long, cold distance, or maybe just in the place where a mother's love outlasts her body, Lily Swiftwind knew she'd been right about them both. I keep coming back to the moment Calvin read that letter at the workbench. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just folded it, looked at Cecilia standing in the doorway and said she had no right to do this. And Cecilia said, "I know." And somehow, in that small honest exchange, 2 people decided, without either of them saying so, that they were going to try. What Lily understood, even at the end, was that a choice only means something if it's freely made. She could have laid everything out in that letter. The whole situation with Calder, the land filing, the timeline. She chose not to. She gave Calvin just enough to open the door and trusted that what he found on the other side would do the rest. That kind of restraint, when you're dying and you're afraid for your daughter and the clock is running, that takes something I don't have a simple word for. It's not just love. It's a kind of clear-eyed respect for another person's right to decide. I think about that a lot. How often we try to engineer outcomes for people we care about, stacking the information in a particular direction, leaving out the parts that might make them say no. We tell ourselves we're protecting them. But Lily knew the difference between protecting someone and robbing them of the chance to be the person they're capable of being. Cecilia knew it too. She showed up in Endako with the truth she was allowed to carry and held the rest until she had to say it. That took a kind of quiet courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside. It looks like a woman sitting on a woodpile with wet eyes, choosing to be honest at the moment when dishonesty would have been so much easier. And Calvin, 6 years of deliberate stillness, 6 years of keeping the rooms locked and the days functional and the wanting at a distance. What strikes me is that he never convinced himself he was happy. He just convinced himself it was finished. There's a difference. Finished is something you've accepted. He'd just gone numb to the gap between what he had and what he'd once wanted. Cecilia walked in and, without trying to, made the gap visible again. That's what I take from this. Not that love fixes things, it doesn't, not on its own, but that the willingness to be honest, even when honesty is costly, creates conditions where something real can grow. Lily was honest about what her daughter needed. Cecilia was honest about who she was and what she could offer. Calvin was honest, finally, about what he still wanted. All three of them chose integrity over comfort at the moment that mattered, and the outcome followed from that. Not magically, consequentially. The land east of the river stayed because one woman had the knowledge to protect it, and another woman had the foresight to put her in the right place. That's what clear thinking in service of something larger than yourself actually looks like. Not grand. Quiet, filed on time, under the right license, in a small courthouse in Burns Lake. I find that more moving than I expected to when I first started telling this story. I hope you do too.